that objection.
Mr. President, I want to congratulate the members of the Senate who, by a very large vote today, passed the minibus legislation, which, among many other important things, will provide $1.9 billion for the Department of Transportation's Emergency Relief Fund. And what that will do is help the department deal with the backlog of disaster situations around the country that they previously were not able to deal with. And from the perspective of the state of Vermont, it will help us deal with the devastation that we experienced in terms of our roads and our bridges and our infrastructure as a result of Hurricane Irene. In many, many communities around this state, we saw washouts, we saw bridges destroyed or damaged, roads disappear. And while Vermont is certainly prepared to do everything we can to come up with funds to help, there is no question. But the federal government needs to be there, as we have always been in the past, when disaster strikes a community in America. The name of our country is the United, U-N-I-T-E-D, United States of America. And what that means is if a disaster hits Minnesota or California, the people of Vermont are there to help. That's what we do as a nation. And when disaster hits Vermont and New Jersey, people in other parts of the country are there. So we made good progress today. I want to congratulate Senator Leahy and the other members of the Appropriations Committee for coming up with this funding. And now the ball goes to our colleagues in the House. And now is the time for the House to stand tall, to support what we have done here in the Senate, and make sure that communities all over this country get the emergency funding that they need in transportation in order to rebuild their communities. Mr. President, I want to say a word on another interesting issue which took place today. You may have noticed the Bank of America has decided to withdraw its $5 fee for debit transfers. And let me tell you, the Bank of America, like the other banks that were going to go forward in imposing these fees, did not withdraw them because they were nice guys. They withdrew them because the American people said enough is enough in terms of the greed of Wall Street. Let us never forget that it was the Bank of America and the other huge financial institutions on Wall Street who caused the recession that we are in, resulting in millions of people losing their jobs, their homes, their life savings. Let us never forget that when Wall Street was on the verge of collapse, it was the American people and the Fed who bailed them out. And now that Wall Street and the large banks are making very handsome profits, paying their CEOs some of the largest compensation packages they've ever received, their thank you to the American people was to charge them $5 a month debit fee. But you know what happened? The American people said thanks, but no thanks. It wasn't the Senate that turned this around. It wasn't the House that turned this around. It was the American people. And I want to applaud the people on the Occupying Wall Street campaign who focused attention on the greed of Wall Street, and the millions of other Americans who have said enough is enough. And the point here, Mr. President, which is a very profound point, which is ultimately what politics is all about, is that if the American people at the grassroots level begin to stand up and fight back, profound and positive changes can take place in this country. If the American people stand up and say, no, we're not going to cut Social Security, we're not going to cut Medicare, we're not going to cut Medicaid or education, but we're going to move toward a balanced budget by asking the wealthiest people in this country, whose effective tax rates is the lowest in decades, to start paying their fair share of taxes, we can do that. We don't have to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And if the American people say maybe we've got to end these outrageous tax loopholes that allow oil companies that are making huge profits right now in some years to pay nothing in federal income taxes, we can end those loopholes as well. And if the American people say, well, maybe before we cut programs for the elderly, the sick, and the children and the poor, maybe we want to make sure that those companies and individuals who stash their money in tax havens like the Cayman Island, where we lose $100 billion a year because of the tax havens, when we rally the American people and they stand up and say enough is enough, we can change that too. So today I want to congratulate the American people. You did it. You took on the largest financial institution in the United States of America, and you beat them. And that should be step one. We should go on from there. The American grassroots have got to continue to speak up in the fight for social justice in this country. With that, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
In my capacity as Senator from Minnesota, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated without objection until the previous order. The Senate stands in recess until 4:30.
So, as you heard, the Senate is in recess until 4:30, allowing members to attend a closed-door briefing by Defense Secretary Leon Panetta on Iraq, Afghanistan.